Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, have you been tethered to the cosmos? What does that mean? How tethered are you? And do you want to be or not? So, to answer this is the author of an amazing book that I love called Tethered to the Cosmos. And I'm so glad to have a guest for Energy Stew. The author of that book is Lee Kemter. Lee, welcome to Energy Stew.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
I'm so glad because this is quite a beautiful journey that you've written through, maybe we could say through the cosmos, but let's start where you started from, because you had a loss in your life and you were trying to learn more about life and the universe, etc. So can you start us off that way?
Yeah, so I began to write the book probably within 6 months of my husband passing away. And for anybody, that would be a major event. But for me, it was opened up inside and his passing was very it could be expected because he had ALS, which is a degenerative disease that over a period of time, in his case, fairly shortly, within a year or so, uh, every his muscles begin to deteriorate. So what was important though is that he and I met later in life, and we had lived in India. We had a passion for the yogic texts, for wanting to know consciousness and to answer I call the three big questions that the characters in my book always ask themselves. Who am I? What is the world made of? And why am I here? So now I'm watching somebody I love deeply who's a very profoundly spiritual person having to grapple with all this, like the end of life and what's going on with the body. And yet at the same time, I realized I had no control over it. All I could do is work with my frequency. So I'd seen both my parents through the end of life, had been with them. So it wasn't that I was afraid to be with them, but I didn't want him to go either. So there was this balance of holding on to this world and to him, and a letting go and an opening to those bigger questions. So even throughout, literally to the last breath this guy took, we were in the communion of what is consciousness? What is this experience that we're having? And so I didn't hold back when I wrote the book. The book centered around our experience of what I use the word unicity in the book throughout all three. This is a trilogy. It's a very important word because people think I made it up. It is a real word. It means it's the condition of being unified. So my husband and I talked about that a lot the last few months, especially of his life. And again, we already had studied consciousness and ancient scriptures. We meditated every day. He was older than me, but so he had probably meditated every day for an hour or two for 40 something years. So, it wasn't like all of a sudden he had this big epiphany. His death was an extension of his life, and that's what I really got to see. And so in the book, we have the main character is a lot like me. She knows that there's a longer extension to herself. She didn't just land on a planet in a finite space-time. So I incorporate throughout the book basically a lot of things. When people ask me, like, how could you write about a death like that? Well, it's because that's really what happened after his death, and as was leading up to the death. And I brought in my ancestors because I have some very interesting German ancestors. And so I can bring in a lot of pieces of my own life, which I think probably a lot of novels are like that. Yet I also wanted to be able to talk to people, let the characters talk to each other in a way that I like to talk to, like you, Peter. Like they were having conversations and they continue in conversation for these three books with those three questions in mind and everything about how to expand this condition of being unified, unicity, as an adjective for a gene that they want to express, the unicity gene. So I bring in all kinds of quantum physics because I love that, and mysticism from lots of different cultures. So we have a character who's definitely realizes, and even though in a human body, it says in the very beginning of the book, she doesn't have memory, like none of us do, of where we came from. So part of her life from 2020 to 2045 is to figure out, get that memory coming out more profoundly and accepting some pretty metaphysical things that start to happen for her. And there's some that, again, people ask me all the time, did that really happen? Is that really true? Could that happen? And what I always say is, if you think this is a big deal, this is nothing compared to what is possible for anybody. But yeah, I have had some pretty metaphysical experiences. So the book's power packed with, I call it spiritual upliftment and expansion, because that's really where I see us going now. It's the only way to move through the times that we're in, is to do it from inside ourselves. So the heart is a big part of it. There's a lot more about geometry. There's a lot of biophysics in the book as well, because I started to learn from biophysicists how we have these, what seem to be metaphysical experiences. We're just connecting to the cosmos. And I say the cosmos, to all that is, to God, or conscious, the fullness of consciousness. So
Right. And we already are of that. We just don't know it.
yeah. So the lead character, it's not a surprise that her name is Sophia. That word is really embedded, I think, in our consciousness as wisdom itself, that wisdom incarnates.
Right.
And it can, of course, in male or female body, but that Sophia would be the main character. And anybody that's listened to your show more than a few times, you've had some very interesting guests on, and that's how I first heard you, is that you had somebody talking about giants. And I the little, I don't, all the things that people say haven't happened. I've done so much research in these books, and I like, giants are just a part of my world. I used to get upset when I was little, because they would tell these awful stories about these mean giants. And I felt like I was their advocate. I remember my mother would always tease that I didn't fight very often. I'm pretty even tempered. And I'd get upset with my brother if he called a giant evil. It was like, no, they're so nice. No,
No, but they're
like,
no, but they can be intimidating just by their size. They can be really nice, but they're so big. But we're not talking about a fantasy either, even though your book is, you know, a fantasy in a sense, because I identify Sophia as you. Every time Sophia is talking and whatever she's doing, I'm thinking of you. And so it's fascinating watching her, um, be so interested in giants as you are. And one of the reasons you live in Idaho is that's where there are caves of giants. That I don't think you've seen any walking around, but certainly there are skeletons.
yeah, absolutely. And throughout the books, the idea of the giants and their place in the cosmos starts to build, because the way I ended up in Idaho is kind of crazy. You can probably tell from my accent. I'm from the South. I grew up, I was born in Tennessee. I lived most of my life in Texas. And when my husband started to get sick, he had friends in California. So we thought, well, that'd be a good place to go for a while. So the property I had was overwhelming. We decided to move. So we got to California, and that whole time, instead of hiking and enjoying the beautiful, California is just exquisite. We were in Northern California, and that's why you find the characters in that part of California with Sophia and her husband Nate. So when we got to California and then he passed away, I didn't have a tie to California. It wasn't that I needed to stay there. And my characters, I started writing the book there, and the characters kept talking about Idaho. And I knew there were giants and there was all this stuff coming up. And so I thought, I should go to Idaho. And I kept hearing in my head, and Peter, I've talked about this stuff before, you get these voices in your head, and I know it's inner guidance, and I know I have a team, an invisible team, and I believe in them. They've always been there. But when they say stuff like out that outrageous, for a Texan who landed in California, I'm going to go to Idaho. I've never even been to Idaho. So I felt so strongly that I should go that I packed up my bags and came to Idaho for the first time and found places I had written about. And that was the confirmation that I think my mental, capacities needed to say, okay, you're on the right track, keep going. So up here, I originally came to one town. I'm now really close to the border. I've come into northern Idaho, and I've been able to visit the megaliths. And actually, this summer I went to one in Montana, and the person that was our guide said, "Well, there's this area up there on that hill, and they call it the solstice something." And she said that some researchers have spent about a year looking at that, and it's a very ancient site, and it does look like it was used for solstices. Well, when I got up there, I looked around and went, this is what I saw. When I looked at the mountains around me, it was like, this is what I saw in the first chapter of the book. It's still giving me chills. And like, can I project my consciousness to this place? Have I been here before? Was this the first time I was here? What is this place? Why am I being shown this? So then I spent quite a bit of time going through megaliths, and they're so huge, and these walls that were built there, all of the architecture have been looked at by people who study ancient sites all over the world, and they're very clear. They have to be giants, and they had to have been, I like the way that one of them says, built with intelligent hands. These were intelligent beings. And so the book, although we talk about megaliths, we talk about all that, and like you said, it seems fantasy or sci-fi, it's real. And these megaliths do tether us to the cosmos, to the beings. We don't know if they beam down. We don't know if they're part of our DNA and they're just our ancestors. There's lots of questions that Sophia is happy to not have answered right away. She's
Well,
more in the exploration of all of it.
and I think that's the fun of it too, because we don't know, even if we think we know a ton of it, we probably only know a scratch of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
we are and where we are and how we are a story that is so profound in terms of evolution, in terms of consciousness. Why did humanity, why has humanity chosen to live this long journey of abuse? Humans have been terrible to each other. And why would we be on a planet where there's such ignorance and limitation, and so much of the population isn't awake? And what's the purpose of that? Why would we even bother as souls to put ourselves through such limitation? And obviously there's a higher purpose for that.
Yeah. So you would have been really good friends with Sophia.
I'm
She
sure. Yes. Well, I'm
yeah,
glad
she
to
would
be
have.
friends with you.
That's right. Yeah, because these are the things that Sophia and her friends, and again, as more characters come in, especially in the second book, which is in editing right now. So it's a trilogy, so the books will move forward. But it's that we don't know all the answers, but everything comes back to us. Like, what are we doing right now in this moment to experience, because it has to be experiential, our experience of being unified with all it is. And that's what Sophia wants to know, because like I won't give away all of the things about Sophia and her husband Nate, but part of his passing is about what does it mean to move on? You know, when you're really deeply in love with someone and there's this communion and there's a physicality, and then to wake up one morning and there's nobody to touch and they're gone. And so the like I remember my mind was totally I was besides sad that he was gone because I knew he wasn't coming back. But it was like there was this strange sensation though that the reality of who he was is what he said he always was, just pure light and energy. And if that's true, and luckily we had honest conversations before he died. Um, I didn't have to work through all this by myself because he talked about what it would be like to expand beyond the body. So as you watch how Sophia handles his death and what happens afterwards, that stuff, what happens afterwards actually really happened, where she's connected with Nate. Oh, I'm not afraid to give it away, but like through all three books, Nate didn't go anywhere. They both were committed to a sense of expansion about themselves. And what people say to me when they read the book is they know that I'm a living human being and I'm really conveying an experience that I've had. So if I can do it, it's repeatable. And Sophia is sharing in the book, you're watching how she does it. And she
Right.
doesn't try to do it alone.
But what's interesting is that the book gets into such deep understandings of of where is where.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where is
Yeah.
where? Uh, where is the other side? Where is that?
Yeah.
Uh, and what is the other side? And what does the words the other side mean? And how do we, identify different frequencies, different um, dimensions that aren't separate from each other in ways that, because we're so literal and analog, that we don't know how to look at how dimensionality might all be one, and at the same time, it has its unique realities to it that have whole universes within each one.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because I come from such a rigid background. It's almost amazing, a miracle that I would show up at this place because I was very, very Orthodox Catholic, followed all those rules very well. I worked for a corporation, I did all that, but there was something that happens for everybody, in their life, and I begin to what happens, same thing for Sophia. She just kind of like says, I have to take a stand now. I have to look at what I've always known was inside me. And the world's moving that direction. We got to break out of the box that we're in because we're
Right,
we're too controlled and we've polarized from each other too so far that it will break. Eight great civilizations. Nobody thought the Roman Empire would ever fall. Or at least Romans didn't think it would. You
right,
know,
right. But
so
your book is so full of perspective of life,
hmm, mhm,
of
yeah,
you, because you go through a lot of history of the planet and
yeah,
and look at it in in a way that says, well, let's not take it for granted what we think it is.
Mhm.
Let's try to
Yeah.
figure out what it might really be if there was this unicity. And
Yeah. Yeah, and what I wanted to share and love to share, and I can't stop talking about it, is quantum physics and mysticism, to me, just bridge with each other so perfectly. You got sages in every tradition talking about consciousness in different words, that we're all one. They say it in different ways, but they're all saying the same thing. We're infinite. We're immortal. And then our left brain locks us down to, yeah, but I've got this body and this isn't working right. And that person over there is mean to me. And we get into the left brain because we're so programmed to do that. And what I look forward to, and as the books move forward, they're exploring a world that they start to live in. The world starts to shift in good ways and challenging ways. So this book is not like a Pollyanna thing. This is really looking at the hardcore issues of what we're faced with, but always from their perspective, from like quantum physics. And I talk about biophysics because biologically we are we have a capacity to experience oneness, to experience this unification with all that is, but we block it with our left brain. So
it's
we are
hard to
going to have,
comprehend. So I
yes,
don't know how much we block it so much as we aren't ready to appreciate it.
that's the blocking I'm really talking about. Like we don't, let's say we don't focus on the totality of who we are and the unification. We tend to focus more on the
On the
material world,
mundane.
on the very mundane. And one of the things that frequency is so important about it is that at a certain frequency, all these traditions have talked about this throughout time, and quantum physics talks about it. Anything that's fearful, angry, or even prideful, like the Romans, they were pretty proud of what they were doing, and it didn't bode well for them. Like any of these lower frequencies are really manipulated. Like people, we're so manipulated by media and by everything else around us. So we get in those lower frequencies, and if we stay and just stand still, just I would say just dog paddle, like a little frantic person in all those frequencies, there's all these exalted frequencies that are available to us, and we don't touch them. We
Well,
don't go there.
we have to realize what lower frequencies means. And it really means lower feelings, lower emotions, uh,
Yes,
emotions of fear and anger and rage and hate. And, so when we're indulged in all of that, then we can't at all find oneness.
right.
It's all about division at that lower level. And,
Yeah.
and the higher the consciousness level is, the higher the sense of oneness, of unicity. And so to get there, we have to have the perspective of seeing what we're facing.
Exactly. Yeah. And the hardest part for me in all of this was not to judge, because like there's in our culture we're taught to rationalize this is right and this is wrong. These are the good guys, find the good guys and get rid of the bad guys, all those polarities. And objectivity, it brings, I realized pretty quickly, was going to bring me into a higher frequency. So it was being aware of where I was judging. And that's not always easy because people are saying, well, these other people are really bad. But
Well,
then
one
there's someone,
one way I look at it to give me perspective is to think of this way of good and bad as tribal thinking,
mhm,
and to think of inclusivity as collective thinking.
mhm,
And so it makes it easier to identify that, oh, these people are speaking tribally. And then I understand that they haven't yet figured out how to speak collectively.
Right, right. And part of what's helped me also has been just opening up to so much more. What the world is so much more. The world, I say, reality, like the reality we live in here, like the cosmos, all these, like the invisible beings that I know that are around me. And I know through quantum physics that there are beings who could be in this room right now, but I'm not at a frequency level to be able to actually see them, or maybe that their species is more of a plasma than it is a form. Like you start thinking about things like that, and everything gets a little bit fuzzy, like, whoa, this is what? And so Sophia is confronted, as I was, with both what her husband calls higher dimensions within her own consciousness. So she's not going to what a physicist would call a coordinate in space-time. Like she's not going to someplace in the Pleiades or Alpha Centauri or the moon.
Right, it's
Not a
all about what
coord.
is anyway.
It's just higher dimensions. So
Right.
I used the example of somebody was talking about, well, then what dimension would Jesus be? And I said, he could just be right here next to me. And he could project his physical form. So I'm standing here with Jesus, and we look out at the gorgeous forest. And I'm going to go, whoa, did you see that tree? There's a moose over there. Look at the light streaming down. And he might have to go, uh, give me a second. Okay. And so he said, and I'd have to, and so if I said, well, what are you seeing? Well, I just see light everywhere, but just give me a second. And then he could work his with his own consciousness to get where, oh, okay, that's a moose. But there are beings, and they're on this planet right now, that just see things differently. Like I have one friend, and she has always seen flecks of light in these little codes. And in her whole life, she's probably, I think she said in her 50s, she's only told 3 people
Oh,
because she's been afraid
yeah.
that
That-
that she'll get locked up. Because
Yeah,
when she's
right. Well,
little,
that's true for a lot of people, I think, who would really enjoy your book. So we're really at the end of the show. And the book is Tethered to the Cosmos. You are Lee Kemter, Kemter. How can people follow up?
it's very interesting, just that name, www.leekemter.com. Go there, you'll find the books, and you can contact me about, get on my mailing list for events and book signings, anything like that. And look forward to the next book, hopefully early next year.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And thank you so much. I love this conversation. Thank you for being on Energy Stew.
I really appreciate it, Peter.
And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.live. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.